What if the most widely read book in the English-speaking world, the King James Bible, was authorized by a king who helped kickstart the transatlantic slave trade? Malcolm X made this fiery accusation, claiming the very foundation of this sacred text was shaped by a tyrant. But was he right? Was the Word of God filtered through the hands of a ruler who enabled a system of oppression? We're investigating the shocking claim that the man behind the Bible was also a man who opened the door for profiting from human bondage. The voice of Malcolm X cut through the noise of the 20th century with a searing clarity. He challenged everything, but few of his critiques were as unsettling as his condemnation of the King James Bible. For Malcolm, and for the Nation of Islam, this wasn't just a book of faith. It was a political document, a tool of control. He argued that the Bible, the spiritual bedrock for millions of Black Americans, carried the fingerprints of a compromised monarch. In his speeches, Malcolm X painted King James I of England not as a pious ruler, but as a wicked one who had no intention of setting the oppressed free. This wasn't just a casual insult. It was a deep, symbolic indictment. Malcolm argued that a book authorized by a king who sanctioned a system of human bondage could never be a pure vessel for spiritual truth. Instead, he saw it as a weapon, skillfully crafted to justify oppression and pacify the enslaved. Malcolm X taught that biblical stories of a house of bondage were not just ancient history, but a coded language describing the plight of Black people in America. He urged his followers to look beyond the surface and question the very source of the text they held sacred. His critique wasn't just about history. It was a revolutionary call to decolonize the mind and soul. By linking the Bible to a king who enabled the slave trade, he was trying to break the psychological chains he believed white Christianity had wrapped around the Black community. But to really get the weight of this accusation, we have to go back for centuries and ask, who exactly was King James? James I of England and VI of Scotland was a complex guy. He took the English throne in 1603, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England. He was a firm believer in the divine right of kings, which constantly put him at odds with Parliament. He also inherited a kingdom torn apart by religious division. One of the most popular Bibles at the time was the Geneva Bible. The people loved it, but the crown hated it. Why? Its margins were filled with notes that questioned the absolute power of kings. For a ruler like James, who saw himself as God's chosen representative on earth, this was a huge problem. So, in 1604, at the Hampton Court Conference, James authorized a new official version of the Bible, one that would be free of those pesky, anti-royal notes and would unify the Church of England under his authority. This became the King James Version, published in 1611. It was a literary masterpiece, yes, but it was also a political power move. But while King James was putting his name on the world's most famous book, another, much darker enterprise was gaining steam across the Atlantic. The age of English colonialism had begun. This is where Malcolm X's accusation gets complicated. So, was King James a slave master? Let's be clear. There's no evidence that King James I personally owned enslaved Africans the way a Virginia plantation owner would. But that's a very narrow way of looking at it. A king's power isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he authorizes. Under James's rule, England got serious about colonizing the Americas. He granted the royal charter to the Virginia Company, leading to the founding of Jamestown in 1607, the first permanent English settlement in North America, named in his honor. These colonies were brutal business ventures, driven by a desperate search for profit. And that profit would soon be found in crops like tobacco crops that demanded a massive, exploitable labor force. The timeline is damning. In 1618, King James I granted a charter to the Guinea Company for trade in Africa. While this initial charter focused on gold and other goods, it cracked open a door that would lead to unimaginable horrors. Just 1 year later, in 1619, a ship carrying the first recorded Africans to be sold in the colony arrived in Jamestown. This all happened on his watch in a colony he chartered. While James I didn't personally direct the slave trade, he signed the documents that created the colonial system where it took root. He granted charters and royal legitimacy to the companies and adventurers who were building an empire. The full-scale state-sponsored English slave trade would explode after his reign. But he was the one who set the stage and gave the enterprise his royal seal of approval. He and the monarchy sat at the top of a system that was beginning to profit from human trafficking. This is the heart of Malcolm X's critique. When he called King James a slaveholder, he wasn't making a simple, literal claim. He was making a profound moral and symbolic one. He was pointing out the rotten foundation. The same royal authority that brought us the Holy Bible was also the authority that fueled the colonial machine that would eventually run on the slave trade. This context changes how we see the King James Bible. It stops being some purely divine text that fell from the sky and becomes a product of its time and era of brutal colonial expansion, authorized by a regime laying the groundwork for slavery. It's a book stamped with the seal of a king who, while his translators were debating Greek verbs, was also commissioning adventurers to exploit lands and people across the ocean. From this angle, suppressing the anti-monarchical Geneva Bible makes perfect sense. A king building an empire based on hierarchy couldn't allow a Bible that even hinted at resistance to tyrants. He needed a Bible that reinforced order, obedience, and his own divine right to rule. And that's what he got. The King James Bible became a tool of empire, carried by missionaries and governors across the globe, often used to justify the subjugation of the very people it was being given to. Malcolm X saw this hypocrisy with blistering clarity. He argued that a white Jesus and a Bible authorized by a white king were used to teach black people to be meek, to turn the other cheek against brutal oppression, and to wait for a reward in heaven while their masters lived it up on earth. So, did Malcolm X expose a hidden truth about King James? But not in the simple way most people think. King James I wasn't a slaveholder in the literal sense. But he sat at the top of the political and economic system that initiated and profited from the trafficking of human beings. His reign and his Bible are forever tied to the dawn of the British Empire and the horrors that financed it. This doesn't necessarily invalidate the faith of millions who have found strength in the King James Bible, but it does demand that we see the book for what it is: a complex historical document as well as a spiritual one. It forces us to face an uncomfortable truth: that some of the most sacred pillars of Western civilization were built on a foundation of oppression. Malcolm X's challenge wasn't to destroy faith, but to demand a faith that isn't blind. A faith that's willing to question its own history and to reject any part of it that serves an oppressor. He leaves us with a question that's just as powerful today. Can a tool forged in the furnaces of empire ever truly be an instrument of liberation? What do you think about this history? Does this context change how you see the King James Bible? Let us know in the comments. And for more deep dives into the stories you didn't learn in school, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.